I am Eric Wilkinson. I am one of the therapists in the Office of Work Life. Today, I'm going to be presenting on the broad topic of strategies for helping your middle and high schoolers flourish. So let me reconnect here to my PowerPoint. I'd like to start off with some questions, just some reflection questions. And so take a minute, and if you feel comfortable responding in the chat, you can respond to this first question, and Azetta will read some of the responses out loud. But think about, what do you want for your child in life? Like, what do you want for your child? What are your deepest hopes and aspirations, the things that are most important for you, for your child? You can just type that in the chat, and then as they come in, Azetta, if you can, just read some of those off. So what do you
Someone
want
said
for your
to
child?
be, someone said to be happy, to have a fulfilling life, joy, self-esteem, perseverance, comfortable with themselves. Those are the responses so far. To have joy and self-worth, happiness, fulfillment, success, faith, and joy, to be prepared to face challenges. Someone said they really want him to find the things that bring him joy, that he can keep doing and even have a career. To continue to society, to I guess to continue to be to contribute, to contribute to society in the most part. So those are the responses thus far.
Yeah, those are wonderful responses. So having worked with a lot of parents over the years, I think that everybody's tapped on some central themes. A lot of emphasis on joy and happiness and well-being, a lot of emphasis on being able to be resilient, being able to handle difficult life situations, a lot of emphasis on finding meaning and purpose. So now in the chat, can you put down what schools teach children? And this question of what
Someone,
do schools, I was just going to say, this question of what schools teach, it can be very literal, or it could be, more of a philosophical perspective.
all right, so we have a few answers here. One person said that they homeschool. Someone said every school is different, teaches life skills, how to jump through the hoops in this stage of life, how to do well on standardized tests, supposedly the basics, how to learn, let me go, how to learn and be productive in a work setting. My kids are
Yeah.
learning Spanish in the immersion program. For the most part, academics and character building, or they say they try to. Many schools teach kids how to fit in, which is not what I think is important. How to take tests. Let's see what else here. I think I see that twice. Oh, how to take tests twice. Designing things using technology, learning via online recordings, such as Khan Academy, supportive environment. That's what we have so far.
Yeah, so a lot of emphasis on, specific content, a lot of emphasis on learning, kind of preparing for the workforce, um, learning, somebody mentioned conformity. What's striking is that if you notice in the list, there is not whole lot of overlap between what schools teach and what you want for your child in life. In fact, I don't think anybody mentioned schools teaching joy or well-being, or there might have been one reference about handling adversity. But if you notice, there's very little overlap between what you want for your child in life and what the schools teach. And now we're going to do a similar exercise, just a few things, just list what does our culture teach? So kind of like our cultural values, including media, social media. What's the messaging that our culture teaches um, to our children? And if you can put that in the chat, Zeta will read some of the responses. What does our culture teach our children?
So here are some of the responses. Materialism teaches girls they must look perfect. Consumerism, division, emphasis on material things and being cool. Red Ribbon Week occurred, let's see, recently. I had to explain to my kid what it meant to use drugs or be drug free. Consumerism, cruelty, a whole mixed grab bag of the best and worst of our culture. Instant messaging, keep clipping, compulsive. Instant gratification, very self-centered environment right now. Selfies.
That's a great one. I was gonna say that's a great one to end on, selfies, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so there,
Oh, there's
yeah, there's
another
a.
one. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Systematic racism popped in there
Yes.
too.
So I mean, there's a, I heard a lot of consumerism. I heard a lot of kind of superficial appearance or status based on looks, um, racism. Uh, again, very few things. I don't know if there was anything that was said in response to that question that connects with what do you want for your child. And so then final question is, based on these circumstances, what does good parenting look like? Again, there's no right or wrong answer to this. I'm just curious how people perceive good parenting given the circumstances we've just mapped out.
So those are coming in a little faster. Good parenting looks like the most important things have to come from us. Involvement and determination. This person said, can they answer the question in 20 years? That's a good one. Unconditional love, being supportive and listening. Supportive, helping children to improve on and pursue their interest. Listen, support, encourage individuality and growth. Being there, supportive, listening, good examples. And, oops. And I cannot get this to move. Okay. Teaching kids, let's see what this is. Teaching kids how to evaluate information and think critically. Giving our children the tools to be independent, self-sufficient, and responsible to themselves and society in general. Being supportive. Kindness and responsibility. All right.
Yeah, so a lot of emphasis on, I heard supportive, said being supportive to our children many times. I heard emphasis on autonomy and being able to become independent. I heard appreciation for things bigger than ourselves. Um, I heard, you know, without the word being said, indications of resilience in our children. And I love the answer about, I'll let you know in 20 years, because that answer, really signifies that we don't really, parenting to a very small extent, maybe in a health class here and there, but generally speaking, parenting is not really talked about or taught in schools. So we see a disconnect between not only a disconnect between what schools teach and what we want most for our children. There's a little bit of overlap, but there's also a lot of difference. Schools generally don't teach well-being or happiness or being kind or responsible, or at least not to the extent that we would probably prefer them to teach those things. And our culture tends to emphasize social status, consumerism, kind of simplified, even sometimes racist or biased messaging. And then as a parent, we're trying to help them navigate these worlds so they can become independent, they can be healthy, they can feel supported. And so we're approaching them in those ways. What I would like to do for this presentation is to employ the concept of flourishing, which comes out of the literature around positive psychology. Huppert, not sure how you say the author's name. And so they define flourishing as the experience of life going well. It's a combination of feeling good and functioning effectively. Flourishing is synonymous with a high level of mental well-being, and it epitomizes mental health. Now, a couple things. One, I like to stress that in adolescence, life going well often looks very awkward and messy. We have in our culture that saying, wow, they really have their life together, right? That is often commented about adults and even some adolescents. But when we think about adolescence, we think about all the awkwardness, all the uncertainty, all the anxiety, all the impulsiveness, all the mistakes that makes parents all over the world say, "What were you thinking? What are you doing?" Adolescence is not this kind of picture of, what I think most of us would consider, effective functioning, at least not at all the time, the standards that we kind of hold to adults. And I think that's important to remember because flourishing can be seen, I think, is help, even though this is a beneficial definition because it emphasizes life going well and the positive in life. I think flourishing, particularly in adolescence, is a lot about the process, about children making mistakes and learning from their mistakes, about children being insecure or self-doubting and then learning and growing to be more confident in themselves. It's about children trying things and figuring out, I don't like this or this is not for me, and then trying something else and saying, oh, this is a better fit. So it tends to be messy. It tends to be much more process oriented. I'll also just note, I don't have this on the slide, but the authors did a cross-national study of European countries to try to measure the level of flourishing in different countries. Denmark scored the highest with an estimate that 41% of their people were flourishing. And then on the low end, countries, Portugal and Russia scored where only about 10% of their people were flourishing. But I share that just to bring to your awareness that even on the high end of this kind of conceptualization, even on the high end in Denmark, only about 41% of folks were flourishing. So I think it's helpful to think about this not as all or nothing, but to think about a process where we want to help our children move more in the direction of flourishing. All right, here are 10 components of flourishing that were identified. On the left, we have the components: competence, emotional stability, engagement, meaning, optimism, positive emotion, positive relationships, resilience, self-esteem, and vitality. And then over on the right, we have examples of statements that articulated that positive feature, or in the case of resilience, there's actually a reverse scoring. The statement suggests unresilient or non-resilient perspective. But when you look at these different areas of flourishing, you can, I think, probably immediately identify the role of both parents and peer groups. For example, parents and the relationship with their children have major impacts on whether or not children feel like people care about them, the positive relationships. The dynamics that we have, our interactions with our children, have a lot of influence over how often they experience positive emotion. When we think about self-esteem, this idea, in general, I feel positive about myself. The messaging as parents that we give our children from when they come into this world, but particularly in, throughout their early childhood and then again in adolescence, there's a real vulnerability where our children are immersed in cultural messaging that tells them they're not good enough or there's something wrong with them. You have to have the certain clothes to be good enough, or you have to look this certain way to be good enough, or you have to have certain grades to be good enough, or you have to make the varsity sports team to be good enough. So they're being bombarded with messages about all the ways that they're not good enough. When we are able to positively and unconditionally support our children, we help support their self-esteem. Emotional stability. If we think about that, creating like a calm and caring and supporting, nurturing home environment is going to enhance their emotional stability. So those are just some examples of how when we think about the core components of flourishing, every one of these in some way is impacted by our parenting. I just want to very briefly run through the different adolescent stages. From 10 to 13, we have, this is where most children start to go through puberty. So there's a lot of physical changes in their bodies. The body changes can inspire curiosity, but it often inspires anxiety, especially if they don't expect or know what's normal. This can be a particularly vulnerable time for children that are questioning their gender identity, or for transgender children. In this age group of 10 to 13, it's kind of like the know-it-all stage, where kids tend to be very idealistic about what is right or wrong, very inflexible, very willing to tell other people when they're wrong, and very willing to tell you when they're right. Preteens are during this time period tend to start seeking out more opportunities for privacy. Then we have middle adolescence, ages 14 to 17. We continue to have physical changes from puberty. Many teens become interested in romantic or sexual relationships during this time period. Many adolescents start to have more arguments with their parents as they really try to seek out more independence, as they try to say, this is who I am, this is what I believe. And these are the things that, in ways that I differ from my parents, or different from previous generations. The brain continues to change and mature in this age, but there's still many differences with an adolescent brain and an adult brain. There's research that's established that around the age of 14, most teenagers have the same ability to use logic as a full-grown adult. But what is different is they have an undeveloped frontal lobe. So even though they can identify risk, they can use logic, they don't have near as much self-control. They tend to be much more impulsive and much more driven by their emotions. And so this results, and they also have higher levels of dopamine in their brain in adolescence. All this kind of combines for them to be more inclined for risk-taking. It's not that they don't know when risks are present, it's just that they overvalue the rewards in contrast to the risk. So for example, if a teenager is in high school and they learn that there's a field party where there's going to be alcohol, they're aware of the risks. They're aware that there could be intoxicated people, there likely will be intoxicated people, there could be fights, the police could get involved, people could get arrested. They're aware of the risk, but the thought of missing out on a potential social opportunity to be friends, to be cool, the sense of the benefits just outweighs the fear of the risk. And so another way that can manifest is if you see these statements down at the bottom. It's thoughts like, I'm doing well enough in math, so I can skip studying tonight and see a movie. Or if they're sexually active, they might think, do I really have to wear a condom? My girlfriend is on the birth control pill. Or they might think, how bad can marijuana be? It's legal in over half the states. I remember I once worked with a teenager who was a really high IQ child, and he had started using cannabis at a young age, probably at age 12 or 13. And knowing that he was really smart, I initially thought, well, I'll share some research with him that, that documents that if you engage in heavy use of cannabis at a young age, that it tends to have negative long-term impacts in your cognitive functioning and your IQ. And so I bring this article on it, and he sits there, he's patient with it, he reads the article, and then he looks at me and he says, yeah, that makes sense. He goes, but I'm pretty smart, so I think I can spare a few IQ points. And that's the kind of that to me epitomizes what this stage of adolescence is like. It's not that they're unaware of danger or risk. It's just that they downplay it because they see the benefits as more important. And then we have late adolescence. This is age 18 plus, and this stage, generally, there's the completion of physical development. They're grown to their full height, and they usually do have more impulse control, And if you can see it's been put in bold, they may be better able to gauge risk and rewards. There's a lot of neuroscientists that would argue that we should consider adolescence as going all the way up to age 25. So there's still a lot of frontal cortex development where teenagers learn executive thinking, planning, identifying risks, thinking about the big picture. Okay, and then if we were to briefly cover some parenting styles. Several of you, a lot of you mentioned good parenting consists of being supportive, and that is absolutely true. High levels of parental responsiveness, which includes warmth, can be defined as being accepting, nurturing, supportive, sensitive, and warm. That kind of warm kindness, so that when your children are around, they just feel good to be in your presence. They feel cared for, they feel accepted. We know that parental warmth supports emotional stability in children. It helps them find meaning in their lives, feel optimistic about their futures. Uh, Bringing warmth and responsiveness to our children uh, helps develop positive emotions. It builds a positive relationship with our kids, and it also supports resilience and self-esteem. Behavioral control. Behavioral control is conceptualized as a set of active parental strategies involving the communication of clear and consistent expectations for appropriate behavior and efforts to monitor the child's behavior related to these expectations. Several things are embedded in that. One is open dialogue and communication with your children about house rules or expectations for their behavior, what's safe, not safe, what's okay, not okay. But it also requires really being involved with your kids, checking in, monitoring them, and holding them accountable. Behavioral control supports emotional regulation, because when we are able to establish routine and order in our children's lives, they feel safer, they feel more regulated. That also contributes to positive emotion. There's less things to worry about, less things to have to try to figure out. And it can create vitality. And when I was thinking about vitality specifically, I'm thinking about, there's an epidemic where most adolescents are sleep deprived. So if you can help your kids get consistent quality sleep, if you can get the electronic media out of their rooms when it's bedtime, if you can help them engage in physical exercise and other activities to release stress from their body, if you can help them to eat some healthy foods, all these things are going to contribute to their vitality. Behavioral control also supports safety and can give them opportunities for reasonable risk taking. So if we think about reasonable risk taking, climbing up the side of a really tall building is not an example of reasonable risk taking. Getting with your friends and saying, let's go take my parents' car out for a spin, even though we don't have our driver's license, is not a reasonable risk taking. So looking for opportunities for them to try things, to move outside of their comfort zone. It could be taking them to a rock climbing gym. It could be allowing them to have over some friends that you can kind of be present and supervise, maybe some folks that they're interested in romantically. That's a form of risk taking. It can be allowing them to dress in new ways. That's a form of risk taking, because it's undetermined how they will be received by their peers. So when we think about behavioral control, there's a list at the bottom. It includes things like bedtime routines, house and family rules, privileges and consequences, and then planning out social life, recreation, family events, and academics and chores. Autonomy granting. Autonomy granting is defined as parental encouragement of the child's individual expression and decision-making. It's allowing the child to make choices about their activities and behavior and encouraging the development of independence. This sometimes does not manifest in ways that make us super comfortable. We may not like that our child wants to dye their hair, or we may not be a fan of the music they listen to, or we may not agree with the politics that they're embracing. But allowing them to make choices for themselves about what's important and have conversation and communication around it, but ultimately not trying to control them, giving them space to explore their sense of self is really important. Autonomy granting supports sense of competency because they're able to make their own decisions. They get practice making their own decisions. It helps them identify what's meaningful and important to me. It can really build engagement, meaning that if you have, for example, a child that is really interested in anime and you really support them in this area, they're going to feel really engaged with this activity. It strengthens your relationship with your child, helps them build resilience because they're able to recognize that they have internal strengths and that they're able to try things, make mistakes, and be okay. And then it builds their self-esteem because you're basically supporting them in what is most important to them. And thinking about how you can help support your children, your teens in identifying and living in a way that's true to their values, it's important for you to know your own values. And so here's just a list of some values. There's about 75 values on that list. There's potential hundreds of values. Knowing what your core values are, what your family values are, and then also knowing that when your children grow up with you, they're aware of what your values are. They see it in your decision making and your behaviors. They see it how you talk about the world and what you say is important. So by the time they're teenagers, they don't usually need a lot of education around, what your value system is. What they do need is an opportunity to think about what are the most important values to them, and for you to be curious about what values matter to them, to have to ask questions, to listen, not try to like impose that on them, your values, and say this is what you need to be most important to you. That will not create a healthy relationship. It will not create a sense of competency or self-esteem. So being open to your children and talking to them. Now, parents have certain limits, and their child may say, well, my value system is I am no longer going to participate in the education system. I'm going to drop out and I'm going to live on the street because I want to live free of materialism. And I think the education system is failing. And, you would probably say, well, I recognize that non-materialism is important to you. I appreciate your critical thinking about how the education system could be better, but it's really important to me that you get an education so that you have future opportunities. So just because there can be a conflict of values, a lot of times you can make space for that difference. And there's other times where you might have to say to them, okay, this behavior choice is not okay. If we think about, and then finally, this is a kind of a maladaptive examples of parenting, psychological and harsh control. So psychological control is where parents attempt to manipulate their psychological experiences by using guilt, shaming them, and conditional love, where you only give them love if they do what you want, or kind of take on your views of the world. Harsh control, we're really talking about corporal punishment, being very verbally abusive of towards our children. So those are additional parenting styles that tend to have negative outcomes. When we think about a systemic literature review, the results are pretty clear in these areas. Parental warmth, behavioral control, and autonomy granting are related to reducing symptoms like anxiety, depression, anxiety, self-loathing, self-doubt. Conversely, psychological control and harsh control by parents are associated with anxiety, depression, behavior problems, and even suicidal ideation. So when you're thinking about how am I interacting with my child, you really want to be first and foremost in a place of parental warmth. You also want to have some behavioral control where you have kind of clear expectations for house and family rules. And then you want to give them opportunities to explore themselves, to experience autonomy, whether it's in their clothes or their music or in the values or the political beliefs, or, in their hobbies, not because I like to go outside and meditate. I'm not going to say, you must come outside and meditate with me, really supporting them in what appeals to them. Okay, so I'm going to run through with this whole backdrop of kind of the adolescent brain, which again is very much um, driven by a lot of emotion, a lot of need to feel like they belong to a group, a lot of insecurity and self-doubt, um, a built-in bias towards risk-taking with higher dopamine levels. So this is just the norm for the adolescent brain. We also know that they're living in a world where they're having to navigate all kinds of messages from their culture, from their peers, social media, as well as their family values or values that they might have gotten from church or from their community. And so they're trying to make sense of who am I, what do I believe, and how do I live a good life. Same time as parents, we're trying to give them opportunities to explore who they are, to engage in reasonable risk taking. We're trying to be curious about their experience, to listen more than talking. Anyone who is a parent of a teenager knows that as soon as you start telling them, what they need to do with their life, they check out usually in about 2 seconds. So a much better approach is to ask them, what do you think you'd like to do, after high school? That question in itself starts to develop the frontal cortex, the frontal lobe, executive thinking and planning. It also allows them an opportunity to express their values to you. Looking for ways to engage them by saying, whether it's about, what do you think about this as, do you like this as maybe the new couch that we want to buy? Or what do you think about these different cars we're considering for the family? What do you think about these options for vacation? Teenagers are more than willing to share their opinions on a whole range of topics. So really giving them a platform and being and sincerely interested in what they think allows them to feel that autonomy. Encouraging teens to express their opinions, not only is it important in terms of their value development and becoming more independent, but it also is an opportunity for them to learn, how can I express my opinions without insulting others or attacking others. So you can model to them, a statement that might sound like, oh, okay, I think, let me see if I'm understanding your view on this correctly. And then you restate their view. And then you might even say, so I respect that view. I recognize it's important to you. Would you like to hear how I think about the situation? That kind of dialogue helps to teach them how they can communicate in ways that are not aggressive or argumentative. It's really important to communicate early and often. This cannot be stressed enough. A lot of the most important things we need to talk with our children about, whether it's sex or puberty, whether it's about death or loss, these are uncomfortable, inherently uncomfortable and awkward conversations. So the earlier you start engaging with these conversations, the more that you're able to do them by embracing discomfort, and the more that they're able to do it, the more that the culture within your family is one of open dialogue. So I know a lot of pediatricians talk about, really, folks will say, at what age should we start to talk to our children about sex and puberty? It's ultimately a family decision, but a lot of pediatricians encourage folks to start having that conversation when kids are around the age of 8 or 9. It's really helpful for them to know what puberty entails before they're going through it. And so then when they're going through it, then they're able to come to you and they already have some understanding, but they're able to communicate. It's really helpful to understand that, what does sex entail, and what do healthy relationships look like? What do unhealthy relationships look like? What are positive friendships? What are unhealthy friendships? The sooner you have these conversations, then when the situations arrive in their life, there's already a dialogue that's been established. and a safe place to be able to come back and talk. Same thing about difficult conversations around substance use, the use of social media, what bullying looks like, how to respond to bullying, which can involve assertiveness skills. And then also, I'm a big proponent of encouraging, even though, especially in young adolescents, they tend to be very egocentric, asking them, I wonder what that other child was feeling when this happened, encouraging them to practice empathy. Or I wonder if somebody is going through a difficult time, how we could help them, encouraging them to practice compassion. And then finally, making sure that you prioritize positive emotions, giving them opportunities to feel good about themselves, to laugh, to smile, to spend quality time with their family members, quality time with their friends. Additional things that you can do is help them identify, what am I good at? What interests me? And really trying to support them. A lot of times their interests may kind of come and go. They may, be into skateboarding one month, and then the next month they're into anime, or they may be, into theater for a while, and then they're into dance. There's a lot there's a lot of experimentation, and so allowing them to experiment, taking interest in what interests them. There is a children's strength survey that's a free survey at AuthenticHappiness.org. This could be a nice thing to do with your teenager, is see if they would be willing to take the survey. There's 24 core strengths that are identified based on the results. And so once they have a sense of what they're good at and what interests them, the two of you can kind of, if the three of you, if there's two parents, but basically as a family, you can start talking about what are opportunities to activate your strengths, to do things that are consistent with your interests and things that you're good at. This builds sense of competency, it builds resilience, it builds self-esteem. Providing them opportunities for interactions with positive peer groups. So this could be through clubs or sports, volunteer opportunities, through school organizations or church organizations. It's really important to try as much as possible to have, always make sure that there's reasonable adult supervision whenever you have a group of teenagers together. I shared with a couple of my coworkers not too long ago. I was going on a jog through my neighborhood, and I saw about 15 teenagers laying down in the middle of a fairly busy residential street, just in the middle divider of the road. Probably was a TikTok challenge of some kind. The only way something like that happens, that you have 15 kids who look like most of them are probably in middle school, laying in the middle of a road, is due to lack of adult supervision. Monitoring their social media consumption and also having an understanding with them. If you're going to, I generally recommend, being friends to them on all their platforms, but it's also good to talk to them about kind of the rules around, or how you're going to engage with them. So maybe you will be their friend, so you can see anything that they post, but that you're not going to comment on their post, or you're not going to comment onto their Facebook, because that may be embarrassing to them, or to their Instagram, whatever the platform is. Modeling emotional regulation skills. When you get stressed and angry or frustrated, saying out loud, I feel really stressed right now, or I feel really upset right now. I need to go take a walk, or I need to do some breathing, or I need to journal. When you model emotional regulation skills, this is really the most effective way to teach them to children. But also giving them access to things, let's say, like, let's go do a yoga class, or hey, do you want to go to the gym with me? Or how about if we go for a hike outdoors? Or here, I got you a new journal in case you want to start journaling. So giving them opportunities to build healthy coping skills. Slowing life down. There is a really strong cultural push to scheduling every minute and every hour of our days. And a lot of parents do this with the best intentions. They want to make sure their kids are not missing out on opportunities. So they sign them up for multiple sports or school clubs. And what happens is that there's very little downtime, which is detrimental to their physical and mental health, but it also deprives them of an opportunity to use their imagination and to engage in self-exploration. And then finally, looking for, really allowing them to express who they are. As long as they're not engaging, I generally try to encourage folks, as long as they're not engaged in behaviors that are harmful to themselves or harmful to others, or in some really important way in opposition to family values, generally allowing them to play around and explore with different ways of being. This is how they discover, who am I in this world? It's how they learn to experience a range of emotions. It's how they learn new social skills. Ultimately, it's how that they connect with their authentic self, which is really important. So that they're not just trying to conform to the expectations of everyone else. It's already a given that they're going to feel immense pressure to conform to the expectations of their peers. But when they feel like they have to meet the expectations of their peers and their parents, those are the children that are really most at risk for anxiety, depression, or even suicidal thoughts. Here is a list of my references. I encourage, if any of these articles sound interesting to you, you can do a deeper dive. I also included, after the references, I'm not going to go through these slides, but these are some recommendations on how to engage with your children around social media. This comes from the American Academy of Pediatrics. So the first slide just documents some parenting strategies, as well as, the multiple ways that teens use media. And then the second slide maps out some recommendations. The second recommendation about avoiding displacement. This is really talking about making sure that social media does not eliminate family time, does not eliminate exercise or time outdoors, does not eliminate quality time with their friends. On average, this was reported a couple years ago, so it might be higher now, but you go back just 2 or 3 years ago, on average, teenagers were using social media 9 hours a day. And if you think about it, most teenagers should be sleeping at least 8 hours, but really most teenagers really need about 9 hours sleep. So if they slept 9 hours and they do social media for 9 hours a day, that leaves them with a total of 6 hours left. Now we know that that most kids are not getting 9 hours sleep, and a big reason is due to social media. With that, that includes the presentation. Azetta, I don't know if you want to continue recording at this time, or if you want to stop the recording and then I can just respond to any questions or comments.